So with you being in the government and experimenting with all these different types of evidence, at this point, what would you say is like the most important or the most relevant type of evidence?
So we knew that primary research and data was important, and then data that's representative of our society. If we came from our apartheid days, it was excluding majority of citizens. So it's more about flows, evidence, how does it flow between these producers and policymakers as one set of users.
So thank you very much, Harsha, and welcome. Just to start us off, could you please tell us about yourself and the policy space that you're working in, especially related with evidence-informed decision-making?
Okay, thanks for the opportunity. So my name is Harsha Dayal. I am Director of Research. I think the location matters for evidence-informed decision-making. I am Director of Research at the Center of Government, which means that we are in the presidency, but there's a few other government departments that are at the center. And when it comes to evidence-informed decision-making, we experimented for the first part of my career in the Center of Government. And we asked this question, what is really policy-relevant research? And in answering that question through our work, we realized that traditional methods of doing research wasn't relevant for policy. And that's when we got into what and how and all the nuances of evidence-informed decision-making. So that was like the journey, but in doing that, we came to a very sort of bottoms-up workplace methods that we had to explore, that evidence synthesis was needed to inform policy. And this was way back in 2015-14 when we started to ask this question, what is policy-relevant research?
Okay, that's really interesting. So with you being in the government and experimenting with all these different types of evidence, at this point, what would you say is like the most important or the most relevant type of evidence or evidence synthesis output that really helps you to make these kinds of policy decisions that you're involved in?
So I think it's not just one type of evidence, and this is aligned to any policy cycle. So you see that in the history of South Africa, many of our policies had to be reviewed, coming from the pre-94 democratic stage and then post-democracy. And through that review process, we find that evidence was lacking in major areas, and we had to generate that evidence. So we knew that primary research and data was important. And then data that's representative of our society. If we came from our apartheid days, it was excluding majority of citizens. So we had to start to make our data that informs evidence inclusive already. But it was a long stretch because population groups and how we measure populations was exclusively orientated to certain population groups. So that had to start shifting. And then in the evidence generation, we find that when we started to introduce synthesis methodology, then we found that many primary studies were not available for even reviewing, but where it was available, we brought that in. And when we did our first 4 mapping exercises, we saw an oversupply of diagnostic evidence, telling us what the problems are. And many of the policymakers would already have known what the problems of the country are, especially in certain sectors. And from map to map to map, there was an oversupply of diagnostic evidence. And it didn't go into, okay, what will be our option for South Africa in our context? What is a menu of options? And even that should be evidence-based, evidence-informed. And then going into our planning processes. But now that's an ideal situation because we jump into planning, we go quickly into what our solutions should be, and then we have all these interventions. So some of the interventions were in place before, but you start to see that poverty persists, targeted groups are not meeting their needs through these interventions. So the evaluation and monitoring of these, how it's being implemented, was a critical source of evidence that didn't come from, it came from government usually. So I think this is where some of the different types of evidence that enters our policy cycle at different stages that needed to be gathered on a continuous routine basis, which didn't happen. So a lot of the evidence needs informed processes and systems differently. And we had to even put attention on that. So the types of evidence then is diagnostic evidence to tell us what the status quo of a problem area is, but also then what are our options. And a lot of it was, trial and tested in other countries. It wasn't really here. If it was in South Africa, it was in certain provinces. We didn't get to having evidence across all 9 provinces. And then we had to start to look at what was there. And then some of the more, what scenarios will play out. If we do this, what will the evidence show? If we do that, what will the evidence show? And then, the evaluations was important evidence as well, but it was not readily available or in all the sectors that we needed. And then based on that, what was the cost of introducing these policies, intervening in a substantial way, and what is the cost to government, to policymakers, and is it efficient, effective, all those judgments we have to make about an intervention. And that was the menu of evidence that was needed. But as you can see, it wasn't all available for one policy decision.
It's really interesting to see the progress and how you've identified, the needs that you had, and also the presence of the evidence that you could use. And also you mentioned some things around inclusivity and the need of the government understanding that. And that sort of indicates to how relational this space is, right? So with that in mind, what would you say currently, especially, is the sort of the major gap that exists between the relationship between the decision makers, the research producers, and now we're an ESIC consensus meeting, right? What would you say also how ESIC could contribute into solving these gaps?
Yeah, so I think the starting point for me was not seeing it as a gap, because we know the challenges of policymakers. Everybody has spoken at length about time, not getting through all the reports and sifting through what the evidence is saying, or even asking for the evidence in the first place. And then producers, they have their own timelines. They produce evidence maybe after about 3 years that comes out from a very, rigorous research scientific process. We know both sides. It was more about what, and I think, okay, let me all just say, in identifying those kind of problems before, many networks and bridges were starting to be built, but you still see the status quo like that. So it's more about flows, evidence, how does it flow between these producers and policymakers as one set of users. So for the gaps that really does exist is building those and connecting the policymakers with where the evidence exists, right? Because if you identify a gap, it means that there's no bridges or networks or highways built, and it wasn't actually the case. It's very rare when scientists and those that are producing evidence don't know who the policymakers are in that space. It's about, like you said, they haven't built that relationship. They haven't taken the time, energy, and commitment to build that relationship, because long-term relationships take time. It means the same sort of network should be there. And maybe they just say, somebody else will do that. And who will that other, grouping or intermediary person be? It's often left to that. Even policymakers will expect maybe someone else to bring the evidence to them. And that's the role we play in the government at the moment.
Great. It's really great to hear your perspective on this. And now, in this consensus meeting, we've been working on ESIC for the past months. And with all the challenges and the opportunities that we've discussed now, and you have, gone through your experience, what one thing would you wish that ESIC would have an impact on yourself, your life, your work, and also for the wider people in the global context?
Yeah, that makes it a personalized question, right? So because I think we're all trying to make a difference in our corners. For me, what excited me about ESIC from the word go was that finally at a global level, our work is recognized, that synthesis is the way forward, because we do it every day, right? But building on where the experts are and how they are doing it is actually recognizing at a local level that we're on the right track. So ESIC and being involved, and this is the exciting part of it, is to see how your own relevance matters in a global setting where you could be lost, be invisible. But ESIC is making it really more explicit, validating the years of hard work and commitment we have been doing over the years, So that's what excites me, and I think ESIC's underlying tone of building relationships really matters, and that's what excites me.
This was really great, and I really love your perspective because I resonate with it as well. So thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.